Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest, absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Today we are going to discuss one of my absolute favorite herbs. And I know I've said that about several herbs in the past because I have many favorites, but today we're going to talk about gentian. And gentian is, between the history and the effects of this herb, it is definitely in my top 10 and probably more like in my top 3. I absolutely love the herb. And, not only is it just a wonderful medicinal herb, one of the prettiest flowers you'll ever see. The cover of the book I did with Jolanta Wittub. We did a new translation with a commentary of Father Johann Kunzel's classic herbal, The Herbs and Weeds of Father Johann Kunzel. You'll see a gentian flower on the cover. If you want to pull that up right now, go to my blog, my website, go to Amazon, whatever. It's The Herbs and Weeds of Father Johann Kunzel. You'll see a beautiful gentian flower in the Alps. Jolanta lives in Austria in the Alps. So her photography in that book is breathtaking. Honestly, uh, that was the first book that I wrote and published, and her photography was so amazing. Yellow gentian, Jolanta did a phenomenal job, and of course you've got that backdrop, like out of The Sound of Music. You've got these beautiful meadows and high elevation peaks all around, and I mean the Alps are just absolutely gorgeous. There's no two ways about that. But before we get into this week's herb, I just want to thank everybody who's bought my cookbook. The Omnivore's Guide to Home Cooking is really being well received. This one, I released the cookbook last week. It's the culmination of many months of effort and a ton of writing. And, I'm so passionate about food. I enjoy food so much. And again, I'm trying to help people become more self-sufficient. So I demystify cooking. I take things down to the very basics of techniques and ingredients. And if you get this book, you can cook at home with whatever you have on hand, as long as it's real food. I don't do any semi-homemade. There's nothing in my book that comes out of a can or a box except maybe pasta. Yeah, or rice. Hey, if you get your rice in a box, some people do. I usually get it in a bag, but it's a fun book to write. It's a good book. I really do think if I hadn't written it myself, I would certainly buy this book. So when you put something out like that, you just kind of hold your breath. How is this going to be received? You never know. Absolutely never know if you're going to get good reviews or bad reviews. And especially when it's something so personal as really sharing a lot of family recipes and such, and the history and the culture. I mean, there's a lot of my culture in this book as well. And then, of course, my personal taste. I mean, to insult someone's cooking is tantamount to insulting their personality. So, if they have any skills as a cook, I mean, obviously, no one's born knowing how to cook. You have to be taught. But once you learn how to cook, it's very much a representation of your personality and your taste. So put it out. You never know what's going to happen. And the reviews have been great. The reviews have been spectacular. Um, Everyone who has bought a copy that's given me feedback says, I'm just loving this book. It is so fun to read. I did it in a narrative format, so it's just like I'm talking to you now. I'm telling stories and I'm giving you history and I'm just having a conversation with you, really. And people are saying it's just so fun to read. I wish other cookbooks were written like this. Well, it was really a risk for me to do a cookbook in that style because most modern cookbooks are not written that way. Most modern cookbooks are nothing more than recipes and details and measurements. And that's not the point of my book. The point of my book is to teach you how to cook, not to teach you to cook like me, and teach you how to combine flavors and ingredients and encourage you to grow those ingredients in the garden, keep some chickens in the backyard, hunt and fish and buy livestock from local farmers and really bring all this into your kitchen in creative ways. I mean, once you read through my cookbook and you've learned a few recipes, you're just going to be able to combine flavors and think, this would be good prepared this way and this would be good prepared that way, and you'll know how to do it. And cooking becomes fun when it becomes something you know how to do. It becomes easier. It takes less thought. It takes less effort. You can involve, friends in it. You can involve your kids in it. It becomes a very enjoyable thing that's also necessary to life and health. So that's always good when you can combine, something that's necessary with something that's fun, right? Well, the reviews have been great. And if you want to check one of them out, there's a review up on the front page of the Grow Network. They did a wonderful review of my book, completely as a surprise, unsolicited. Just said, "Hey, I bought your book, and I'd like to write a review for it. Check it out. It's on the website." And I was blown away. There are going to be some other really good folks that are helping me out with this book too. Permies.com is the big website for permaculture. It's, I think, the biggest permaculture website in the world. Paul Wheaton founded it back in the 90s. I think it was the first permaculture website. Uh, they're going to review my book, and they're going to do a contest where they're giving away some copies of the book. So I'll have more information on that in a couple of weeks. Anyway, people are just loving the book, and it's gratifying because it is really such a reflection of me and my family and our culture and our traditions. And, it's great. It really is. I'm very thankful for each person who's bought my book. So if you're interested in the new book, like I said, it's the Omnivore's Guide to Home Cooking for preppers, homesteaders, permaculture people, and everyone else. Yes, one of my massively long titles. But just remember, the Omnivore's Guide to Home Cooking. You can get it from judsoncarroll.com. You can get it from Southern Appalachian Herbs at gmail.com. If you want ebooks, if you want a paperback book, you can go to Amazon or any of the outlets serviced by Amazon or Smashwords. In other words, in one version or another, in all ebook versions, etc. My book is available anywhere you want to buy books. And if you would prefer to buy my book from an actual physical bookstore, it'd be great if we still had some of those in my area. Amazon kind of put them all out of business. It's like, Willie Nelson said, he didn't like Nashville, but you have to go to the store to sell your product. Well, he had to go to Nashville to sell music, and I have to go through Amazon to sell books. Ask them to order my book, ask them to order a few, put on the shelf, right? If you'd rather go to a library, it is so hard for an independent author, a self-published author, to get into libraries. It's really a big scam. I mean, there is a network of essentially library book reviewers and buyers, and you can't get into there with a sledgehammer and a crowbar unless you're published by a major publishing company. It's ridiculous. But any person with a library card can go to their library and request my book. And if you would do that, oh wow. I mean, it's great. I want you to have your own individual copy. But for me, even though I do actually make less on library sales, libraries can buy books for about half price, essentially. I love the idea of my book sitting in that library and 100 people reading it. Just, that one copy, 100 people, it influencing 100 people's lives. And that's true of all my books, and especially Christian herbal medicine, the history of Christian herbal medicine. I think I've said before that it's so important to get that information, that history, to preserve it. And hopefully it won't end up in one of their 10-cent book sales within a year, right? But, anyway, you would like to have the book. I would like for you to have the book. whether you want a PDF or a Kindle or an e-reader, or you want a physical paperback copy from Amazon, you want to buy it through a bookstore, or you want to get it in your library. And, money's tight for all of us. I absolutely understand if you would rather have a library copy. I'm just thrilled to be able to provide it, to be able to make that happen. And, yeah, yeah, like I said, it's just really, I think it's an important book. I think it's an important book. I think it's important for people to know how to make homemade food from scratch, not only for their health, but for their physical, spiritual, mental well-being, and for the health of the family. Remember, the as a Christian, as a Catholic, the home is a small reflection of the larger church, and the altar of the home church is the family table. It's where the family comes together and communes with each other, and hopefully gives thanks for what they're about to eat. The table is the central unifying feature of that family home. It's where stories are told, it's where love is expressed, it's where bonds are formed. And you take away the family table, you destroy the family. So I actually do see a very multidimensional, many multidimensional facets, I guess I should say, to this book. It is not just a cookbook, it's a way of life. People have actually said that what you're promoting is a way of life, and that's true. That's true. So I guess I'll catch you up on my week a little bit. Oh my gosh, you never know what's going to happen, right? So I went down the mountain to help a relative out clean up after the hurricane. Now, if you've ever lived in an area with a whole lot of pine trees, you know that a hurricane will basically turn a yard into about an ankle deep pile of sticks and pine cones and pine straw in the blink of an eye. So, my relative lives in Pine Barren and in the central center of North Carolina, and the property was an absolute wreck. I mean, I have spent day after day picking up just her yard and dumping trash can full after trash can full of yard waste by the curb with the intention of, if the county doesn't take it off, I'll shovel it into the back of my pickup truck and take it off myself. So I was about halfway through cleaning up, and literally it had taken me a week, several hours a day. And she says, my dryer's not heating up. Can you figure out what's going on? The other thing about living in a pine barren is there are a ton of squirrels. Well, a squirrel had gotten in the dryer vent outside up into the duct pipe and decided to nest. And it was full of lint and acorns and squirrel poop. you know, I don't, let's just say I'm not entirely on board of feeding squirrels in the backyard and keeping them as quasi outdoor pets. I think they're much better prepared and served on the plate, actually. Squirrel gravy is pretty darn good stuff. But that's pretty common where she lives. And the squirrel had gotten in there and caused her either the thermostat or the heater element itself to burn out. And probably the thermostat, because when there's back pressure against the blower, the thermostat doesn't regulate properly and it burns out. So I spent a few days trying to find a thermostat to replace. Turned out they don't make them for that model anymore. And my only option was to basically find a junk clothes dryer store and buy one. And she needed one right away. So I looked at new appliances and I did not like the quality for the price. Found a really good electric dryer down at the Habitat for Humanity Restore. Great price, great dryer, good and solid. I hated I couldn't fix the dryer, but, didn't have the part. Couldn't even source the part. I called up Sears and everything. They said, no, we can't even order the part for you. I would have had to take my chance with a used part off of eBay or something. You know how that goes. So anyway, because I bought a used dryer, it meant unloading it and installing it myself. And I pretty much knew that was going to happen. If I had bought from Lowe's or uh, Home Depot or something, they probably would have delivered it and picked and hooked it up. Well, I get the dryer on my truck and I drive back and I start to take the dryer off the back of the truck, and one of the little feet on it kind of caught and it turned funny. It started to overbalance in one way. And of course, I'm doing this by myself. So I grab the dryer and wrestle it to the ground and sit it down without one bit of damage to the dryer whatsoever. You know, pretty big, strong guy. And I just right off the truck and onto the ground. Well, my ankle wasn't as strong as, as the rest of me because as it came down at an angle, I heard my ankle go crunch. And so, yeah, I've been sitting here the past few days with stress fractures in my ankle. And let me tell you, that is not fun. No, it's not as bad as it could be. Certainly, by no means the worst injury I've ever had. Yeah, mainly just kind of bummed about not being home in the mountains for the beautiful fall colors and those frosty mornings and the turkeys walking through the yard. And of course, some of them might end up in the freezer. I'm gonna be sitting here watching the squirrels taunt me from the backyard and a pine barren for a little while until I can get rejuvenated and recuperated. But you never know what's going to happen. And for something like a broken bone, this is just a minor fracture, really. There are not a lot of herbs that are going to help, but comfrey will definitely help. If I were home, I would have comfrey and arnica on hand. I would be using the arnica to take out the swelling and bruising and reduce the pain in the joint. And I would be using comfrey to speed the healing of the bone. As it stands now, there is not a single place within an hour's drive that I can buy what I need. I don't think what I need grows around here, and I can't get out and hobble around on one foot looking for it. So I'm a little slowed down in my recovery. But the moral of the story, of course, is have what you need on hand before you need it. Whether you grow the herbs or you have to buy them, have them dried so you can make teas and decoctions and soaks. Make your tinctures ahead of time. If I had an arnica liniment right now, trust me, I'd be in a lot less pain. Basically, the only thing I'm seeing around here would be oak bark. I could do an oak bark soak, which would tan my skin a nice brown color. It would look like I'd been to the beach, maybe, but it would reduce inflammation a little bit. I frankly just don't think it's even worth the effort to hobble out there on one foot and try to strip off some oak bark. It's not that effective. There's a birch tree up the road. If I could maybe get her to dry me up there, I could get some birch and do a soak with that. You know, birch has wintergreen oil and it has salicin, like aspirin, but it's fall and really the birch is better in the spring. So I think I'm just going to rely on elevating my foot and a little bit of aspirin every now and then and a swallow of bourbon every now and then and try to get through this one. If I don't know, maybe Monday I might consider ordering some comfrey. A comfrey salve. I found some very good comfrey salves that are on the market, but really right now I'm just wishing I had some arnica. Anyway, that's my week. I hope you're having a great week. The weather is cool and beautiful and sunny, and honestly, it's even though this is not my preferred environment, the woodpeckers are gorgeous. There are three or four different types of woodpecker, species of woodpecker, I guess, in this area that are pretty common. These big ones with the red heads, like Woody the Woodpecker, and they actually sound like they're laughing. And these small ones, I think they may be called Pleiated. They have a beautiful pattern on their back. I've been really enjoying watching the woodpeckers. They're gorgeous. And of course, there's squirrels everywhere. There are a whole lot of fox. Fox come through the yard at night. Just foxes sound really angry when they bark. They sound like somebody's upset about something. So it's always kind of fun to listen to them. And a deer. I mean, a billion deer, I think, around here. And oh man, it's making me itch for my for my 270 Winchester that I can't lay my hands on right now. Couldn't process a deer or anything right now anyway with a broken ankle. But yeah, I mean, the wildlife has been really fun to watch and to experience a different environment, one that I'm not as used to. It was a gorgeous blue heron down kind of in a creek, kind of low pond area. I guess it was day before yesterday, and I mean it was out there, looking for bugs and I guess crawfish and whatever. It's tadpoles probably in that little pond, and it was just beautiful to sit there and watch that heron, just by itself, lone, kind of stalking along, waiting. They're incredible animals. They're great hunters. If you ever want to really learn the art of stalking and hunting from nature, watch a heron. I mean, they will eat snakes, they'll eat frogs, they'll eat fish. They'll grab, fairly large mammals. I mean, definitely something the size of a squirrel. I think like muskrats and such. Nutria or even a game they'll eat, and they just stalk up to it and then boom, just strike perfectly smooth and swiftly. And there's actually an old Chinese story about I can't remember if it was a Zen story, probably maybe a Taoist story about how the heron stands there seeming to be doing absolutely nothing, right? And he has no extra movement. There is pure efficiency. He sits there perfectly calm, unmoving, and then strikes. And it's done in the blink of an eye in a second. Beautiful thing to watch. And turtles, tons of turtles down here. The big eastern box turtle that I found the other day. He was walking through the yard, And there's snappers and stinky gems. Oh my gosh, a stinky gem is a slang term, a common term for a certain type of snapping turtle that has a secondary defense mechanism. In fact, we might call it the primary defense mechanism. Snapping turtles have strong jaws and a big beak, and they would easily, bite off your finger or take a chunk out of your leg if they feel threatened or if you bump into one in the water. But a stinky gem also has a scent gland that sends out this horrible odor. I mean, like almost like a skunk does. And so anyway, one of those was encountered the other day. We'll just put it that way. But we always try to find the bright side in everything. I don't think it does us any good to sit around and complain and say, well, I wish this had happened or I wish I was doing that and I'm stuck here. Yeah, there's an upside and a downside to anything, right? Um, Speaking of my cookbook, there's really good internet access here, which I do lack in the mountains. I have very little internet access at all in the mountains. And so it's helped with the marketing of my cookbook. And there's some pretty good markets around here. I found some great eggplant the other day before I broke my ankle. Nice fresh eggplant. So let me just go ahead and share with you one of the recipes from my book. This is an eggplant parmesan recipe that is influenced by so many people. All right, first of all, in the mountains of North Carolina, lots of Italians, people straight from Italy, a lot of Italian Americans that have come down from New York. And the marinara sauce that I like to use is one my mother learned from her friend from, I think, somewhere upstate New York, somewhere around Niagara Falls. Very Italian American, just, good tomato sauce. You sweat down some garlic and onions and olive oil. You throw in your tomatoes. You can add some peppers. I like to add some mushrooms and peppers. A little pinch of pepperoncini, that crushed red pepper you sprinkle on your pizza. Throw that in there. A little bit of basil, a little bit of oregano, and you're good to go. I mean, it's very simple. Just let it simmer and come together, salt and pepper to taste, and it's really nice. I mean, you never have to buy marinara sauce out of a can. Trust me, that recipe is in my cookbook. And really, if you've been buying spaghetti sauce or something out of a can, just learning that marinara sauce recipe in my cookbook, I would say within a couple months' time would pay for the cost of the cookbook. So go for it, right? Well, get that marinara sauce going. Now, the other interesting side of the family, I had an uncle who was a mayonnaise addict. This man put mayonnaise on everything. Now, I had learned, in my teens, early 20s, I had learned a very, traditional Italian eggplant parmesan recipe. Well, one day my uncle says, you've got to try this. Instead of just breading the eggplant slices the way one normally would, he would put mayonnaise on either side of the eggplant slices and then put them in breadcrumbs seasoned with Parmesan and Italian herbs. And then instead of browning them up in a pan with olive oil, he would put them in the oven at a nice high temp and brown them off in the oven. Well, I thought that's crazy, but yeah, I'll give it a try. And it's really good. The mayonnaise helps the breadcrumbs, of course, stick to the eggplant and gives it a nice richness. And yeah, I'm sure Italians are standing on their head right now, Frank Salvato, who often has interviewed me a couple of times for his show, and his girlfriend CJ, they're good friends of mine. I'm sure Frank's doing handstands right now. You put mayonnaise on your eggplant parm, yeah, okay, it's good. I'm not saying it's Italian. I'm just saying it's good. And of course, my uncle was just using store-bought Hellman's or whatever. I like to make my own homemade mayo whenever I possibly can. I'll get into that another day. Homemade mayo is not rocket science. You can actually do it pretty easily. And if you have your own chickens and you have nice fresh eggs, it will blow your mind. Honestly, it is so much better than anything you can buy in a store. The other tip is something I learned from one of the Italian chefs in my area. Used to be chef on the Love Boat. He's done everything from high end to diner cooking, and he's from Italy, and he's a pretty cool guy. First time we're talking food, we're talking the eggplant parmesan, right? And he tells me I must be Sicilian because I love eggplants and tomatoes and hot peppers so much. Well, I don't think I have any Sicilian blood in me actually, but his tip was to take the eggplant and slice it, into rounds, salt it on either side, and then put it between paper towels and press the bitter water out of it. And it presses it down, and it makes the eggplant taste better. One, because you got some of that bitter water out of there. It gives it a more meaty texture, and it makes for a more enjoyable dish once it's all baked up. So took these eggplants off some, there were a couple of bad spots on them, but they were nice, firm, fresh eggplants. Sliced them up, salted them down on either side, pressed the water out of them. What I did is I just stacked them. I put a paper towel down on my cutting board, same cutting board I cut them on. Stacked them on that with a paper towel between each layer, and I put a second cutting board on top and a weight on top of that. I think it was maybe a 32-ounce weight or something, a big can from the kitchen cabinet, basically a big jar actually it was, and left them for an hour, and it soaks the water out of it. Well, then just take them, and they're nice and dry, right? So things aren't going to slide off of them. Slather them down with some mayo on each side, which, yes, I know is crazy, but try it. You're going to love it. I had some breadcrumbs. Some of the sourdough bread I made was getting a little old. So just toasted it up a little bit and then crumbled up nice fine breadcrumbs, mixed in some dry Italian herbs, the standard stuff, basil and rosemary and oregano and all that, and a little bit of Parm, a little Parmesan cheese. Nothing fancy, just, grocery store Parm. And mix it together, coat them on either side, brown them up in the oven. I think I went maybe, I don't know, 15 to 20 minutes at just say 375. Yeah, we'll go somewhere between 350 and 400. I'm not that detail oriented when it comes to such things. I cook things till they're done. Well, I put these in the oven and I cook them until they were brown. Take them out. Take a nice big casserole baking dish. Put some of that good marinara sauce in the bottom. A layer of eggplant, more parm, more marinara, eggplant, more parm. And on each piece of eggplant, a little slice of mozzarella. And then the top, some breadcrumbs, Parmesan cheese, tons of mozzarella across the top. Okay, that's easy. It's not an expensive dish. I mean, really, the cheese is the most expensive thing you're going to buy. But I'm thinking in about a 10-pound um, casserole, essentially 10 pounds of eggplant parm in this, normal casserole size pan. Let's say seven. I'll go on the lean side, right? So I'm getting 7 pounds of eggplant parmesan, and I got what, maybe $5 worth of cheese in there, and $3 worth of vegetables, maybe, garlic, onion, tomato. It's not that much. Let's put a few mushrooms in there and a poblano pepper because I didn't like the looks of the bell peppers. So no big deal, right? So I've got less than $10 worth of ingredients in a casserole that's going to be a minimum 7 pounds worth of food and probably more like 10 pounds worth of food. You're talking probably 8 to 12 servings. I mean, that's not bad. That's not bad. And if the stuff was coming out of the garden, think how much cheaper it would have been. But I was away from home and I had to go to the market. That's my philosophy of cooking in a nutshell. Now, I'm a big meat eater. I like to have a little meat on the side, so a little Italian sausage, good hot sausage with fennel seed in it, perfect accompaniment to eggplant and tomato and garlic. Those flavors go so well together. So that's one of the recipes you will find in my cookbook. And whether you have a garden at home or you You have to go to a market. You're going to find everything fairly inexpensively and really enjoy it. And I'm telling you, that is a mind-blowing eggplant parm. It is as good, it is better than I've had in most restaurants and as good as I've had in the most authentic Italian restaurants and home cooking with Italian grandmothers. My eggplant parm, yeah, it's actually that good. Okay, let's get into this week's herb. This is gentian, and as I said, gentian is a great herb. The history of gentian, it's actually named after the king Gentius. Gentius was the ruler of the Aurelian kingdom from about 181 to 168 BC. He was an herbalist. He was a king who was an herbalist. And a lot that we know of him comes from the writing of Dioscorides, the great Greek herbalist who passed down, well, most of what we know about Greek herbalism to modern times. He said Gentiana seems to indeed first have been found by Gentius, the king of the Aurelians, from whom it took its surname. The leaves are similar to carria or plantain. And he talks about the root and he identifies it. We don't need to get into all that. He says 2 teaspoons of the root are warming and astringent and taken as a drink with pepper, rice, and wine helps those bitten by venomous creatures. Now, that is really important. You may think, oh, that's crazy, right? But see, Gentius was one of those kings who was looking for a universal antidote against venomous bites and stings, I mean, from scorpions to snakes and spiders, poisons, and the plague. And he came up with one of these formulas from which we get our modern day digestive bitters. Gentian has been known for most of history as the king of bitter herbs. Now, there is another herb in Indian Ayurveda they call the king of bitter herbs. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about gentian. Gentian is the heart, really, of digestive bitters. In America, we do have native gentians, by the way. They're far more rare. There are a couple that grow right up around here. You know, maybe someday I'll show them to you. But we would often use barberry or Oregon grapefruit as substitute, even golden seal. This is a one-to-one substitute. They have very similar properties. They stimulate the liver, they stimulate digestion, they help reduce a fever, they have antibacterial properties, antiseptic properties, antifungal properties. You know, go down the list. Gentian was the golden seal, essentially, of ancient Europe. And it's been over harvested. They don't use it as much as they used to. I would encourage you to get some seeds and grow gentian because, as I said, it is one of the most gorgeous flowers you will ever find. I don't care if you live in an apartment building or a POA. If someone's going to be policing your garden, this is one you can grow in the garden, and you're going to find a million uses for it in herbal medicine. And it is an absolutely beautiful flower that comes in an array of shades. There's a blue gentian, which grows around here, yellow, purple. I mean, it's incredible. It's really one of the prettiest flowers you're ever going to see. He said a teaspoon of the extracted juice is good for disorders of the sides, falls from heights, hernias, and convulsions. It helps liver ailments and gastritis taken as a drink with water. He said the root was useful for cleaning sores from leprosy. That's very much like golden seal or the Oregon grape root. It has that antiseptic quality to it. And then he goes on to give several names of what it was called in different cultures. I mean, this is ancient Greece. He's talking about what the Trojans call it. He's talking about what the Romans call it. It was very common herbal medicine in the ancient world, really. By the time we get to monastic medicine. It found itself in the Benedictine system of medicine. It was widely used throughout the Middle Ages. And when St. Hildegard von Bingen comes around, around 1100 AD, probably the greatest herbalist who ever lived, she was very fond of gentian. Probably, I would say St. Hildegard's favorite herb was actually wormwood, and gentian probably would have been number two. She loved her bitter herbs, and to this day, St. Hildegard is synonymous with bitters. There's a whole company called Healthy Hildegard, which makes herbal bitters based on St. Hildegard's formula. She said of gentian that it was good for one who has fevers in the stomach. They should drink powdered gentian in warm wine, and the stomach would be cleansed of fevers. She Recommended gentian for heart pain and stomach issues, and again said it was very good for the liver. Gentian is the primary liver herb, essentially, in traditional herbal medicine. It is a liver stimulant, however. Remember, we have herbs that stimulate the liver and herbs that calm or reduce inflammation for the liver. If the liver's a little sluggish and not working real well, maybe you've been drinking a little too much, maybe you've been um, exposing yourself to industrial solvents and such, and the liver's just not doing so great. If it's inflamed, we're going to use dandelion and burdock and such as that to calm it. If it really just needs sort of a kickstart to get things going again, to help process those toxins out of the body, ginseng or Oregon grape are really going to be the go-to. They stimulate the activity of the liver. They stimulate bile. They can help with blood sugar issues, with insulin. They can help stimulate appetite. Someone asked me just this morning, their grandfather had no appetite, and when he ate, he was throwing up. Of course, I can't give any medical advice, but I have found that a sip of bitters before a meal will stimulate appetite, will stimulate saliva and bile and the gastric juices and the stomach acids so that someone wants to eat and will keep it down. I think for that reason alone, we should always have some bitter herbs around. Going into European, German folk medicine, especially the Germanic traditions, Father Sebastian Nape wrote in My Water Cure, he said the yellow gentian is particularly found in the mountains. Now, the yellow gentian was the preferred gentian at the time. Yellow is associated with bile, especially in the liver. I mean, anything you see that is yellow in an herb is thought to be especially good for the liver. Well, I actually like the blue gentian better, and I don't think we need to harvest one and two extinction, especially when the blue gentian is, to me, a little prettier and just as effective. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. He gives some advice on how to gather it and how to cut the root up and dry it, preserve it in brandy or other spirits. He said the extract is one of the best stomatics. Of course, means it settles the stomach. It's good for the stomach, and it's very true. He says put 6 to 8 tablespoons of water into a glass and pour in 20 to 30 drops of the extract. Take this mixture daily for some time. The good digestion will soon be induced and no less a good appetite. If the food is felt to lie heavy in the stomach and is troublesome, a little cordial made with a teaspoonful of the extract in half a glass of water will soon stop the disorder. Gentian is likewise very good for cramps in the stomach. So exactly what I'm talking about now, with somebody that is having poor appetite and stomach issues. He recommended that after a long journey, especially if you've been eating bad food and drinking too much, he said people arrive at their destination dead tired and almost ill. A tiny bottle of gentian tincture taken by drops on sugar cubes will render excellent service. Sugar cubes, of course, were very common in the 1800s when he wrote that book. They're still very nice to have around, I think. Nausea and attacks of faintness are removed by taking a teaspoonful of the tincture in water. It warms, enlivens, and brings the body and mind to peace again. Gentian utilizes a tea, renders similar services. Either cut up the root of gentian or use gentian powder and boil it into a decoction and take as a tea. Now, Father Nape's protege essentially was Brother Aloysius. Brother Aloysius was I would say, a much more accomplished herbalist. He was a much more knowledgeable herbalist, and he wrote a very large herbal, now known as a healer's herbal. It was republished, I think, sometime in the 70s or 80s, and it's the pharmacopoeia, if you will, the pharmacopoeia, however you will say that, the materia medica of the German folk medicine tradition circa 1900. And he said of the yellow gentian again, the root is used medicinally. No home should be without a tincture prepared for it. It is one of the best stomach remedies to be found in the dispensary and is also a very good nerve tonic and a febrifuge, used to restore appetite and promote digestion for oppression of stomachs, nausea, scars, and ulcers. These are uses I haven't mentioned before. First of all, does have a nerve tonifying effect. It's good for people who are nervous, people who have nervous headaches, but it's also a febrifuge. It's good for fevers. Applied externally, it really does. It helps with scars and ulcerated sores. Gentian, as I said, is very similar in that regard to golden seal. Golden seal would be what was prescribed through most of early America and became one of the most popular herbs in the world. Gentian is very similar, and as is barberry, as is coptis, as is Oregon grape. But they aren't related. They are not the same plant whatsoever. In some regards, gentian is better for certain things than the others. In the English tradition, gentian was no less popular. In fact, it may have been even more popular because the English are notorious for their stomach issues. The English diet traditionally has not been very high in fiber or very tasty, and gentian and other bitters were used not only to promote digestion, but as a remedy for colds and flus and even the plague and all that. So Gerard, writing sometime, I guess, around 1550, 1560, describes gentian. He says that it's a mountain plant. At that time, it was being imported into England from Italy, Slavonia, Germany, France, and Burgundy. He takes some issue with the botanist Taberna Montanus or Taberna Montanus. I have so much trouble with that name. He did not, though, differentiate between the yellow and different types of gentian. He seemed to find them fairly interchangeable, as do I. And he says, he repeats what we already know from Dioscorides, that it was named after Gentius, but says that in England it was known as fellwort, gentian, of course, bitterwort, bald money, and another word that looks a lot like bald money. I'll have to ask my English herbalist friend about that one. He said of its virtues, as he always did in his Elizabethan language, it is excellent good, as Galen saith, wherein there is need of attenuating, purging, cleansing, removing of obstructions, which quality it taketh of his extreme bitterness. Okay, so he's saying its bitter actions, its bitter elements are good for the liver, good for the gallbladder, good for the kidneys and spleen and all that, of getting things moving and cleaning them out. That's basically all those flowery words mean. It stimulates the digestive organ. He said that it was good for those troubled with cramps and convulsions, for such who are burst or herniated, or have fallen from some high place, for such that have evil livers and bad stomachs. And if you ever have an evil liver, be sure, be sure to get yourself some gentian or a bad stomach, and it's so good for the stomach. I have some stomach issues every now and then, and I find the bitter herbs help so much, so very much. I never know why, I never know how. I just every now and then my stomach would just get off, and it's just like indigestion for days with constant bloating. It's very painful. And I have found the gentians and the barberries and the Oregon grapes and stuff to be absolutely wonderful. Or and if I can't get anything else, some Angostura cocktail bitters. The bitters are great. He also mentions it as a counter poison, and he talks about the theriac that we've talked about before, an ancient ancestor to digestive bitters that was created to be a universal cure for all poisons, a universal antidote, whether an animal venom or a poisoning that was intentional, or something caused by bad food or the plague, even. And theriac, in its various forms, very much like the Swedish bitters, were popular well into the modern era and really deserve a comeback. I'm not going to say they're a panacea, but for most modern ailments, taking a sip of theriac or Swedish bitters would be far more effective than health insurance for most things that trouble us, most things that the doctor cannot really even help us with except to treat the symptoms and to tell you you need to change your diet and you need to do this and you need to do that and take all these expensive prescription medications, which are probably going to kill you from contraindications and overdose and just those toxicities of the medications themselves, which, are why in the commercials they say this medication may cause blindness and impotence and death. And you're thinking, isn't there a better option? Well, yeah, actually, Swedish bitters and theriac. And speaking of my British herbalist friend, let me go ahead and recommend her website. It is called Alchemia Apothecary. Her name is Sarah, and I love her work. I have followed her for years and years. Well, I don't want to make her sound old. No, I followed her for a few years. We'll go with that. She's a very delightful and energetic young lady in Cornwall. And Cornwall is one of the Celtic regions, coastal region of England, which has a fascinating herbal history all of its own. And she does a great job, an awesome job, actually, in preserving and promoting that. I guess we can call it indigenous. Nobody's indigenous. We all come from somewhere else, so I always hesitate to use that term. But people have been living in Cornwall for a pretty darn long time. Let's just put it that way. And it's about as different from, London as one can possibly get. My favorite, without a doubt, regions of England are Cornwall and Yorkshire, two very different places with two very different cultures actually. And her name is Sarah Donahue, and we're going to be talking soon. I think I'd like to interview her for my podcast, and she said she might like to interview me, which is a real honor because she's one of the most respected people in herbal medicine. And as I said, I really, really enjoy her stuff, and I have for a long time. I've actually taken a class that she did, and it was a real pleasure talking with her a couple of weeks ago. So, Sarah Donahue, Alchemia Apothecary, and you'll love her stuff. You'll love her formulas. You'll love her stories. You'll love her newsletter. She's on Substack. I recommend her on Substack, and she recommends me. So it's a real honor to be a friend of someone of that quality and character. She's a wonderful woman of character. So let's talk about more about what Gerard said. Well, he quoted Pliny the Elder, saying that it helped cattle which were troubled by the cough, but are also broken of wind. So he's talking about cattle that just aren't breathing very well. He said that the root of gentian given in a powder mixed with a quantity of a dram with a little pepper and the herb of grace mixed where therein. I'm going to have to look up the herb of grace. But that combination, he thought, was effective against rabies. Well, I cannot say it's effective against rabies. I will tell you that berberine in Oregon grape, barberry, golden seal has been found to impede viral replication as well as sanitize and disinfect wounds. Does gentian have a similar quality? Well, I think that would warrant some research. I mean, we got a lot of problems these days with whether it's viruses or antibacterial resistant germs, I guess we'll call it. And barberry and Oregon grape have been found very useful. I wonder if gentian may have an additional help against rabies. That would be phenomenal if it did, but I can't back that up with anything. I'm only speculating, and I'm saying that someone who is more scientific than I should look into it. I'm a folk herbalist and glad to be a folk herbalist. I'm not a guy who wears a white coat and stares into microscopes and looks at test tubes. The decoction drunk is good against stoppages of the liver. I'm going to say this word is crudity of the stomach, helpeth digestion, dissolveth and scattereth congealed blood, and is good against all cold diseases of the inner part. When I read this, I really wish I had paid a little more attention in Shakespeare class in high school, I never was one to get that accent and the proper pronunciation of the words down, but I'm assuming crudity of the stomach is going to be something like, an upset stomach, could even be mucus congestion of the stomach, but, gentian would be good for all the above. Now, Culpeper, about 100 years later, after the world had changed dramatically in England, said, it is confessed that gentian, which is most used amongst us, is brought over from beyond the sea. Yet we have two sorts of it growing frequently in our nation, which besides the reasons so frequently alleged, while the English herb should be the fittest for English bodies, has been proved by the experience of diverse physicians to be not a whit inferior in virtue to that which comes from beyond the sea. Therefore, be pleased to take the description of them as follows. Okay, what is he saying? As he remarked one time in his book, my book groweth long too quickly. Maybe that's because you use too many words, Mr. Culpepper. All he needed to say in there was that the physicians and the pharmacies, he was always very critical of the pharmacists and apothecasts of the time, were using imported gentian when the English native gentian would work just as well. So he describes the plant and he tells you how to find it because, like me, that was a big part of his motivation. He wanted people to take their health into their own hands. And then he says that they were under the dominion of Mars, which to him meant it was a very powerful herb, a very potent herb. Mars was the warlike, god of mythology, the god of war, in fact. But he said, in more practical terms, that it would help against putrefaction, disinfections, poisons, and pestilence. It would strengthen the stomach, help digestion, comfort the heart, preserve against the faintings and swoonings. That's another use of gentian that pops up every now and then. As I had mentioned before, it has some nervine qualities. The powder of the dry root helps with the biting of mad dogs and venomous beasts. So whether it's true or not, he believed it 100 or so years after Gerard. The herb steeped in wine refreshes such who be over weary with traveling. Well, that's a lot like what Father Nape said, a couple of countries apart and a few hundred years apart. He said it was good for the griping pains in the sides and an excellent remedy for such who are bruised by falls. He said it provokes urine and the terms, that's menstruation, exceedingly. Therefore, let it not be given to a woman with child, and that is true. Gentian should not be used by pregnant women. It can cause a miscarriage. It would be very damaging to the mother as well as the baby. I mean, this is not something to be played around with in pregnancy, so tuck that back in your mind. As I always say, I don't recommend any herbs to be used during pregnancy. If you want to know about herbs for pregnancy, talk with an herbalist who has specific knowledge and training in that area. Talk with a good midwife, talk with someone that really specializes in herbs for women during specific phases of their life. And there are several. In fact, most herbal books are written for women, so you won't have trouble finding them. That's just not my area of expertise, and I don't claim it to be. He said the same is very profitable for such as are troubled with cramps and convulsions to drink a decoction. Basically, a tea made from the root of gentian. He says it breaks a stone. That means kidney and bladder stones, gallstones. Gravel, as they used to call it. He says good with tough phlegm, and it is. It has some good expectorant qualities as well. Good for scabs and itch. Again, we're talking like golden seal or barberry used externally, or any fretting sores and ulcers. We've already discussed that. It is an admirable remedy to kill the worms. That's a vermifuge. Yes, gentian and the other herbs we discussed have been used against intestinal worms and parasites. He said it could be taken inwardly for the king's evil. The king's evil was what we might call scrofula at one point in time. It was a swollen gland. And at other times, that king's evil might be referred to a term that was used for gout. Actually, gentian helps with both conditions. It helps all sorts, and the yellow jaundice, and also the bots in cattle. I hate bot flies. One of the most Look, y'all, if you get into livestock and you get into farming, hope you never encounter bot flies. They are absolutely disgusting and an absolute plague among livestock. But anyway, gentian can be used against them. In fact, the Swedish bitters often were used to help with bot flies and other skin diseases of cattle. Gentian is one of the primary components of the Swedish bitters, as I've just explained. And he said even when cattle were bit on the udder by a venomous snake, that gentian decoction of would help heal. He said it would instantly heal them. In fact, can't swear to that. Never tried it. That's what Culpepper said. Now, coming up to modern times in the English tradition, modern being the 1930s, Miss Greaves said of gentian that there were 180 species in all climates. And yes, I think she's right. Like I said, we do have native gentians. They're not among our most common flowers. They're not as common as they are in Germany and alpine areas. But we have them here in the United States. There are four or five, I think, native to North Carolina. He talked a lot about the history of gentian, of course, and that the yellow gentian was the most used, and then it had been used to bitter beer and preserve beer before hops. And yes, it is very good in beer brewing. If you're not into hops, hops have an estrogenic quality. They have a very aromatic quality. They can be somewhat minty or menthol type of aroma sometimes. Some people don't like that, especially if they're really into brewing traditional English ales, really traditional brown ales and such. Gentian is a very nice alternative, and it's good for the stomach, and it actually may make a healthier beer, actually. She said of gentian it was one of the most powerful bitter vegetable tonics, especially useful in states of exhaustion from chronic disease and all cases of general debility, weakness of the digestive organs, and want of appetite. Again, old people, sick people, you have no appetite, you're having digestive issues, throwing up a lot. Bitters taken before a meal. People with chronic allergies. I myself have found bitters before a meal very effective against asthma. Gentian is wonderful, and gentian is one of probably the primary bitter. I mean, honestly, in history, before other bitters were discovered in other countries. She said that it is one of the best strengtheners of the human system, and it's an excellent tonic to combine with a purgative to prevent its debilitating effects. Many dyspeptic complaints, that's indigestion, that's upset stomach, burping, and all that, acid reflux even, are more effectually relieved by gentian bitters than with Peruvian bark, that's quinine. It is of extreme value in jaundice and is prescribed extensively. Beside being unrivaled as a stomachic tonic, gentian possesses febrifuge, emmenagogue, anthelmintic, and antiseptic properties. It means it lowers fevers, brings on menstruation, helps get rid of intestinal parasites, and is antiseptic. Okay, so we discussed all that. It's also useful in hysteria and female weakness. Hysteria was essentially what they used to call PMS. Okay, so she thought it was good for PMS. We'll just go with that. Gentian with equal parts of tormental or galls has been used with success for curing intermittent fever. Intermittent fever, such as with malaria, such as with comes from COVID, can be helped with many herbs, and gentian is one of the primary herbs, just like the quinine she mentioned earlier, for helping with those fevers. Quinine also has antiviral properties. Hey, put the two together, give it a try if you're so inclined. I think that uh, actually, yeah, I would. I'm just putting a formula together here in my head, but I could definitely see putting gentian together with quinine, maybe some feverfew, maybe some bone set, and Joe Pyeweed. These are things I have on hand, and I think that would be a very good antiviral. It was some wormwood, or some another member of the Artemisia family. That would also be a good bitter and help with fevers. Again, off the top of my head, I could be totally wrong on that, but that's something I like to experiment with, and we'll see how it goes. Hey, you experiment with it if you want to, and tell me how it goes. I'm not recommending it for anybody, but that's how usually I come up with herbal formulas. I don't sit there with a piece of paper of a list of qualities and think, well, I'm going to combine this with that. I do it kind of intuitively, and 9 times out of 10, actually like 99% of the time, these intuitive formulas that I put together work a lot better than any I can buy. So I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just a blessing or a knack I have. But like I said, I could be wrong with this one. But those are all bitter herbs, and yeah, I'd throw some Oregon grape in there, and I think they would complement each other. I don't see them as being contraindicated or interfering with each other. But then again, I don't necessarily remember what I just said, so I'll have to listen to my own podcast, write that down, and give it a try. And if it turns out to be a good one, I'll let you know. Really, the only reason we don't think about a lot of these bitters formulas anymore is because of the Pure Foods and Drugs Act. Maybe a lot of intuitive herbalists, if you want to put it that way, threw together some formulas like I just posited, and they worked. They seemed to work for them or for their family. They would then take that formula and they patent it, and they'd sell it as patent medicine. In the 1800s through early 1900s, more people treated themselves with patent medicines than went to doctors. A lot of those patent medicines were great. Bitters were especially popular. Just like cough syrups would have been very popular, pain medications, obviously, and some of them contain morphine. And yeah, I can understand they would have been dangerous. Some of them contain cocaine. The original Coca-Cola formula contained cocaine. In fact, it's kind of funny. Under the Pure Foods and Drugs Act, Coca-Cola was actually sued by the federal government because it didn't have cocaine in it any longer. The federal government said if you're going to call yourself Coca-Cola, which means essentially cocaine and coca, you have to have cocaine in your product. So that's one of those interesting milestones of United States law that we actually passed a law to protect people from tainted or fraudulent medications, and then the government tried to almost force Coca-Cola to put cocaine back in their formula, which would have made it run afoul of the drug laws, which would have outlawed Coca-Cola. But that's a story for another day. It just shows how ridiculous government can be. But anyway, bitters formulas were super popular. I mean, you can go back to the Civil War eras, the old almanacs, the farmers' almanacs, all the publications, magazines for women. Americans had bad stomachs. We had a lot of bad food. We did not have obviously pasteurization, but we didn't have refrigeration. We didn't have sanitary canning. We had a lot of issues. And the meat that people were eating in the cities was not fresh. Now, people on the farm had good food, probably healthier stomachs. Like my great grandparents, they would have just eaten some collards or turnip greens that would upset stomach. But in the cities, the meat was, kind of tainted, and I mean, the whole history of like the Heinz Corporation and such, and the various sauce companies that we take for granted these days, really started as a way to make sauces that covered up the flavor of rotten meat. Well, people with bad stomachs from eating rotten meat in cities and living in unsanitary conditions. I mean, I don't like cities now, but back then they were nasty. They were smoky, there was a lot of sewage, and the food was no good, and lead paint on everything, and not a good idea to live in a city ever. Don't live in a city if you can possibly help it. Well, these people had bad stomachs. They had upset stomach. They had diarrhea. They had indigestion. They had acid reflux. They had dyspepsia. They had bloating. And there was one famous advertisement that said, "America's national condition is dyspepsia." Well, bitters formula settled the stomach. Bitters were phenomenal. Bitters were lifesavers for people. Bitters invented the American cocktail. People started combining bitters with a little bit of sugar and a little bit of liquor, and the entire bar and cocktail industry also finds its roots in digestive bitters. And by around 1900, 1920, there were hundreds of brands of bitters. They were made with herbs like gentian. They were made with Peruvian bark or quinine. They were made with exotic herbs and spices like cinnamon and clove and ginger from around the world. And they're fascinating. This is really one of the high points of American industry and herbalism and culinary history all coming together. I mean, really, the cocktails like Jodes, that's a famous one that originated in New Orleans, created the American cocktail and bar and cocktail hour and the drinks you would have before the meal and all that. And of course, it finds its ancestor in the gin and tonic, where the English took quinine and combined it with gin to have a nice, very nice antiviral beverage that no limey would have been without. Really interesting point of history. And the advertising, if you ever get to see the old posters and magazine advertisements. I mean, they're museum exhibits on the history of just even the advertising of bitters in America. Gorgeous, gorgeous, hand painted. posters, lithographs, and all that of like exotic scenes in India or in the jungles of Peru, and all that stuff that was really popular in the early 1900s, and magazines that were essentially sponsored by companies that made patent medicine. So they'd have stories and they'd have recipes and then a 3-page ad on why you should use their bitters and their, whatever pain medications and such. Like I said, the stuff can get pretty wild. Well, in comes the Pure Foods and Drugs Act. And, it said you could only buy medicine from a pharmacist. The medicines in the pharmacy were going to be strictly regulated. Drug companies came into being, and everybody had to stop using medicine at home and just go to their doctors. And it has ruined our health and our society and made medical care in America the most expensive in the world. And the leading cause of death in America is malpractice, overprescription, medical error, and medical abuse. And so, in my opinion, the government regulations of medicine have been an absolute horrendous disaster and should be repealed immediately. Immediately. I think a grown ass human being can take care of their own health and should be able to write themselves a prescription for whatever they need. Okay? It's not like it's going to hurt anybody. I mean, look, the doctors are passing out antibiotics like candy and basically leading to our destruction and giving us vaccinations that are doing more harm than the virus did. And meanwhile, people are dropping dead of fentanyl and all the opiates they can get. They're getting for pennies a pill. What is the justification anymore? What are they protecting us from? Stop protecting us from ourselves and let us do it. I should be able to go into a drugstore and buy whatever I need. It's my responsibility. It's my responsibility. A doctor doesn't have the right to tell me what to do with my own life, but we gave them that right in about 1914, and we screwed up the farmer, we screwed up the pharmacist, we screwed up everything in this country by saying that people didn't have the sense to be able to learn to take care of themselves. Okay, that's my soapbox for the day. Yeah, the Libertarian Party may be the party of lunatics, and it usually is, but in this case, I wish a whole lot of Republican and Democrat politicians and independents and whatever would embrace the libertarian philosophy of letting people take care of themselves. Let me drink raw milk if I want raw milk. Don't make it outlawed in the state of North Carolina, which it is. They actually have SWAT teams that raid uh, co-ops and such where they think there may be some unpasteurized milk. If I want unpasteurized milk, let me have unpasteurized milk. It's my body and my life, right? Hey, people used to say that a lot, right? My body, my choice. Yeah, until it comes down to COVID vaccinations, and until it comes down to unpasteurized milk, right? And never mind, there's more than one body in that original My Body, My Choice. There's two living beings. And that's another subject for another day. But yeah, I say we should repeal the Pure Foods and Drugs Act. It should be done immediately. Or, I mean, it's not like more junkies are going to overdose if we don't, right? They can still get fentanyl for half a cent a pill. All it would do is give me the ability to prescribe myself some prednisone if I happen to be covered in a rash from poison ivy. I can just walk in and buy it. Um, if I break a bone, I could get a painkiller. If I had an actual infection that an antibiotic would help with, well, I know what that is. I know the difference between a virus and a bacterial infection or otherwise. Doctors don't seem to. Doctors keep handing out antibiotics like candy for every head cold for no apparent reason. Even when the government tells them to stop, they keep doing it. Yeah, I can take care of myself. I can pick up any book that a doctor has, and I have as much knowledge from reading that book as he did. And any one of us can gain experience from experience itself, and you'll get more experience if you treat yourself and your family and whatever. Okay, that's my opinion. Take it or leave it. On this point, I am very libertarian in otherwise meaning that all I really want from my government is to be left the hell alone. Let me earn my money. Let me keep my money. Let me have my property rights. Yeah, I'll pitch in a little to keep the roads repaired. I'll pitch in a little for a fire department and a police force if it's going to enforce the law and not abuse its powers. I'll pitch in a little bit for a military, and if we're attacked by a foreign power, if you'll still take me at my age, I'll go serve, just like my great grandfather did when he was called up at 19 in World War One. I don't think we should be adventuring, causing trouble overseas, trying to be an empire. Let's just take care of ourselves. Let's get our homeless off the street. Let me educate my own kids. Let me take care of my own health. Let me grow my own food. And if I want to pay somebody else for a service, let me do so. If I want to buy raw milk from the farmer down the road, let me do so. Don't get in my way. Don't regulate me. Keep your laws off my body, so to speak. As long as I'm not hurting another person, there should be no problem. And if think about this, the drug companies that made the vaccines are indemnified. They cannot be sued no matter how much um, damage a bad vaccine may do. Okay, I'm not making any claims. I'm just saying that's the way they did it. They said, we'll produce these vaccines if you make sure we can't be prosecuted for any harm. That doesn't seem like they're being regulated very well, does it? I would rather have a vaccine company that could be sued. I mean, honestly, I would much rather trust the courts than the government. If Bob Smith down the street says he's repaired my truck and I drive out of his car shop and the engine blows up, I can sue him and take him to court. That's a very big incentive for him not to do bad work, not to try to rip me off. If one of these patent medicine companies made a bitters formula that poisoned people, they would be sued. They would go out of business. They'd lose everything. They'd go to jail. That's a lot safer of a system than where the government can say that this pharmaceutical company cannot be sued, right? How are we being protected again? But anyway, back to ginseng. Back to ginseng and its modern use. Plants for a Future says that ginseng has a long history of use as an herbal bitter in the treatment of digestive disorders and is an ingredient in many proprietary medicines. It contains some of the most bitter compounds known and is used as a scientific basis for measuring bitterness. That means it's sort of like the standard upon which all other bitter things are gauged. It is especially useful in states of exhaustion from chronic disease and all cases of debility, weakness of the digestive system, and lack of appetite. It is one of the best strengtheners of the human system, stimulating the liver, gallbladder, and digestive systems. It is an excellent tonic to combine with a purgative in order to prevent its debilitating effects. The root is anthelmintic, anti-inflammatory, antiseptic, bitter tonic, cholagogue, emmenagogue, febrifuge, refrigerant, and stomachic. Refrigerant, by the way, actually means it makes you feel cooler. There are a few herbs like mint. You know how mint has a cooling effect. So does gentian. It's considered, I think, in Chinese medicine, is basically a cold bitter when you're looking at its yin and yang properties. It's very yin, and which is odd considering that Culpeper is associated with Mars, and that would mean it's very yang. So again, it just depends on your worldview, I guess, your tradition. It is taken internally in the treatment of liver complaints, indigestion, gastric infections, and anorexia. It should not be prescribed for patients with gastric or duodenal or duodenal, as I was taught to say. I was grew up; it was always duodenal, and now people say duodenal. I have no idea anymore. Ulcers. The root, which can be as thick as a person's arm and has few branches, it's a nice big root. One plant will provide quite a bit. It's harvested in the autumn and dried for later use. And going to the physician's desk reference, we'll see if it has any contraindications. Physician's desk reference says the essential active principles are the bitter substances contained in the herb. These bring about a reflex stimulation of the taste receptors, leading to increased secretion of saliva and the digestive juices. Gentian root is therefore considered to not be simply a pure bitter, but also restorative and tonic. There is also a possible cholagogic effect, although it is not clear if the mode of action is sensory or is sensory reflexive. In addition, a fungostatic effect has been proven from gentian extract. So I'm not seeing any contraindications, at least in that. And let's see, from an herbal energetics perspective, we would say that gentian stimulates the upper gastrointestinal system, which in turn stimulates the lower GI, and it's good for deficiency. It gets the saliva and the stomach acids going and triggers the bile and pancreatic juices. That is a pretty darn good summary, I think, of gentian. I can't think of anything else to say about the plant. Other than, what I'm going to say is that bitters made from gentian just plain taste good. Gentian may be one of the most bitter herbs, but it is actually one of the most pleasant tasting, one of the most delicious of the bitter herbs when combined with some spices and maybe a little bit of honey or something, just kind of round it out. And a little bit of alcohol always helps. And again, one of the most beautiful flowers you're ever going to see. So I definitely recommend growing this one. All right, y'all, have a good week. We've covered a lot of ground in this one. Please buy my books. I know you're going to love my cookbook. And if you take a little bit of digestive bitters before each meal, you're going to enjoy the food even more. So have a good one, and I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.